Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into a really fascinating piece of human drama. It's a case that literally tested the very boundaries of Philippine criminal law. I'm talking about the landmark case of Del Socorro versus Van Wilsem. So here's the core mystery we're unraveling for you today. Can a foreigner just ignore local laws simply because they're holding a different passport? Now, I know that sounds like the plot of some geopolitical thriller, right? But this actually unfolded in real life, right in the heart of Cebu. Okay, here's our game plan for today. We're going to break this down by looking at the Del Socorro dispute, the lower court dismissal, the generality of criminal law, the processual presumption, the Supreme Court ruling, and finally, the ultimate legal takeaway. Let's get right to it. Section 1. The Del Socorro dispute, a cross-border family conflict. So our story kicks off with Norma Del Socorro, a Filipina, and Ernst Johann Brinkman van Wilsem, a Dutch national. What started out as your standard timeline of marriage and divorce pretty quickly snowballed into an intense cross-border legal battle. They got married in Holland in 1990, welcomed their son in 1994, and then divorced just a year later in 1995. After the divorce, Norma and her 18-month-old son packed up and moved back to the Philippines. Eventually, Ernst actually ended up residing in Cebu as well. But, and here's the kicker, he completely failed to provide the financial support he had promised for his son for years. Because of this, Norma filed a criminal complaint under Republic Act No. 9262, the Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act, specifically for the deprivation of financial support. Well, this conflict didn't just stay local. It eventually made its way all the way to the highest court in the land. It's officially documented as Del Socorro v. Van Wilsem, GR No. 193707, decided on December 10, 2014. It's a huge landmark case because it forces us to ask a really tough question. What actually happens when domestic family laws collide head-on with foreign citizenship? Moving on to Section 2, the lower court dismissal, the regional trial court's decision. Now, before the Supreme Court got involved, the local court in Cebu had to grapple with this massive clash of legal theories. On one side, we have the nationality principle. This was Van Wilsem's defense. He argued that, hey, because he's a Dutch national, his family rights and duties, which obviously includes child support, are governed solely by the laws of the Netherlands, not the Philippines. On the flip side, the prosecution championed the territorial operation of criminal law. Their stance? RA 9262 is a penal law, which means it applies to absolutely anyone living or just staying in the Philippines. It doesn't matter what color your passport is. Believe it or not, the lower court actually sided with the defense on this one. They issued an order basically stating that because he was an alien, the facts charged didn't even constitute an offense against him under Philippine family law. They canceled his bail bond and just completely dismissed the case. I mean, imagine that for a second. Imagine being a single mother fighting tooth and nail for your child's legal right to support, only to be told that the father's foreign passport is essentially a magical shield against local criminal prosecution. Crazy, right? So let's look at Section 3, Generality of Criminal Law, the law of the land. To understand why the lower court got it wrong, we need to look at the fundamental principles. According to Reyes's criminal law textbook, our laws have a characteristic known as generality. As outlined in Article 14 of the Civil Code, this simply means that penal laws and laws of public security are obligatory upon all who live or sojourn in Philippine territory. Sure, this is subject to public international law and treaty stipulations, but the general rule is crystal clear. If you are standing on Philippine soil, Philippine criminal laws apply to you, period, regardless of your citizenship. But of course, while the state has the sovereign power to punish crimes within its own territory, there are constitutional limits set up to ensure fairness and proper notice. For instance, the Bill of Rights firmly prohibits ex post facto laws, meaning it protects against retroactive criminalization. Basically, you need to know an act is a crime at the exact time you commit it. Plus, penal laws are strictly construed against the state and liberally in favor of the accused. The law is naturally cautious before depriving anyone of their liberty. But in this specific case, RA 9262 was already in full effect, so there was absolutely no ex post facto issue regarding his continuing failure to provide support. That brings us to Section 4, the processual presumption, the foreign law loophole. But hang on a second, what about his specific claim that under Dutch law he isn't actually obligated to provide support in this way? This brings us to a really fascinating legal concept called processual presumption. Basically, it's the legal system's clever way of dealing with unproven foreign laws.
You see, foreign law doesn't just prove itself automatically. You can't just stroll into a Philippine court and say, well, back in my country, without actually presenting formal legal proof of what your country's laws specifically say. And this doctrine right here is what exposed the fatal flaw in Van Wilsem's entire defense strategy. He invoked Dutch law to try and dodge liability, claiming his national law governed his family duties. But he completely dropped the ball on properly pleading and proving what the Dutch law actually was. And because he failed to officially prove the laws of the Netherlands to the court, the Philippine court was forced by the doctrine of processual presumption to just presume that Dutch law is identical to Philippine law when it comes to child support.
Moving into the climax here, Section 5, the Supreme Court ruling. Justice for the child. Completely overruling the lower court, the Supreme Court delivered a really powerful message. They declared that even if the laws of the Netherlands somehow didn't enforce a parent's obligation to support a child, that foreign law simply would not be applied because it runs totally contrary to strong public policy. To quote the decision directly, they said it would be of great injustice to the child to be denied a financial support when the latter is entitled thereto. So the Supreme Court decisively revoked the lower court's dismissal. They established that the unjustified failure to provide support is what we call a continuing offense. And because this deprivation was happening right there in Cebu, where the mother and child resided, the Philippine courts absolutely had full territorial jurisdiction over both the offense and the offender. Finally, Section 6, the ultimate legal takeaway. Fairness, notice, and protection. Okay, so what should you actually take away from this landmark ruling? The overarching lesson is really about fundamental fair warning and territorial sovereignty. First up, the nationality principle does not override the territorial operation of penal laws. If you're a foreigner, living or even just sojourning in the Philippines, you are strictly bound by local criminal statutes. Second, if you want a court to consider foreign laws, you have to properly plead and prove them. No exceptions. And most importantly, a continuing refusal to provide legally due child support constitutes a continuing offense locally. A foreign passport is never going to be a get-out-of-jail-free card when you commit an offense within Philippine borders. Ultimately, the law prioritizes protecting the vulnerable. I'm going to leave you with this provocative thought to chew on. As international borders continue to blur, how will the justice system keep balancing the rights of foreign nationals with the urgent need to protect the vulnerable within its own territory? As modern family disputes increasingly cross international lines, it leaves us all wondering exactly how the law is going to have to adapt next. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you in the next one.